on Being You, we reflect on the fourth principle. As responsible religious seekers, we recognize that we are privileged to be free to have resources to pursue life beyond mere survival, to continually search for truth and meaning, to exist beyond bounds of dogma and oppression, and to wrestle freely with truth and meaning as they evolve. This privilege calls us not to be isolated and self-centered, believing that our single perspective trumps all others, but rather to be humble, to be open to the great mysteries of truth and meaning that life offers. Those mysteries that speak to us through our own intuition and experience, but also through tradition, community, conflict, nature, and relationships. As a faith tradition, Unitarian Universalism makes sacred the right and responsibility to engage in this free and responsible quest as an act of religious devotion. Institutionally, we have left open the questions of what truth and meaning are, acknowledging that mindful people will, in every age, discover new insights. Words of Reverend Paige Getty of the UU Congregation of Columbia, Maryland. Today's opening words are number 442. We bid you welcome. We bid you welcome, who come with weary spirit seeking rest.
Who come with troubles that are too much with you, who come hurt and afraid.
We bid you welcome, who come with hope in your heart.
Who come with anticipation in your step, who come proud and joyous.
We bid you welcome, who are seekers of a new faith.
Who come to probe and explore, who come to learn.
We bid you welcome, who enter this hall as a homecoming.
Who have found here room for your spirit, who find in this people a family.
Whoever you are, whatever you are, wherever you are on your journey,
we bid you welcome.
Please rise as you are willing and able to join us for today's affirmation and our opening hymn, number 105, From Age to Age.
Let those who live in every land declare that fear and war are done, joined by the labor of their hands, in love and understanding one. From age to age, how grandly rise the prophet souls in line, above the passing centuries, like beacon lights they shine, like beacon lights they shine. They witness to one heritage, one spirit's quickening breath, one widening reign from age to age of freedom and of faith, of freedom and of faith. Their kindling power our souls confess, though dead they speak today. How great the cloud of witnesses encompassing our way, encompassing our way. Through every race, in every clime, one sound shall yet be heard. Move onward in thy course sublime, O everlasting word, O everlasting word.
Today's transitional words are number 652, the great end to religious instruction. The great end in religious instruction is not to stamp our minds upon the young, but to stir up their own.
not to make them see with our eyes, but to look inquiringly and steadily with their own.
Not to give them a definite amount of knowledge, but to inspire a fervent love of truth.
Not to form an outward regularity, but to touch inward springs.
Not to bind them by ineradicable prejudices to our particular sect or peculiar notions.
But to prepare them for impartial, conscientious judging of whatever subjects may be offered to their decision.
Not to burden the memory, but to quicken and strengthen the power of thought.
Not to impose religion upon them in the form of arbitrary rules, but to awaken the conscience, the moral discernment.
In a word, great end is to awaken the soul, to excite and cherish spiritual life. William Ellery Channing. Today's message will be given by Doddie Stone. Doddie is a retired Unitarian Universalist minister, and her topic is Augusta Chapin.
The Augusta Jane Chapin story. It's not surprising that we're not familiar with the name of Augusta Jane Chapin or her role in our denominational history. After all, she's only a second-place winner, and we tend to remember the names of those who came in first. Think of the winners you know: Kentucky Derby horses, Indy 500 race car drivers, top scorers in sports events, or famous scientists who were the first to make discoveries in their field. We award prizes to those who finish first in the classroom and speak of firstborn child with great love. Even the title of this sermon, "We're number 2, so we try harder," reminds us that Avis is trying to keep up with Hertz in the rental car business. So it is for Augusta Jane Chapin. She was the second woman in the United States to be ordained as a minister by a denomination. Olympia Brown claims first place in 1863. And I've always been fascinated by the story of Olympia Brown, but I did not think about those who followed her into ministry. However, when I went to seminary, I learned about many people who made a difference in our denominational history. And among those names, another woman minister captured my interest: Augusta Jane Chapin. I was familiar with the surname of Chapin from my father's research into family genealogy. Chapin was the maiden name of my great-grandmother on my maternal side, and I wondered if Augusta and I might be related. Dad traced the Chapin line back to the arrival of Deacon Samuel Chapin in early New England history, and he tracked all the descendants down to me, and I found out that I am indeed related to her. She's my 4th cousin, 3 times removed. I found a picture of her in a book printed in 1893. That's this one right here. And there seems to be a strong resemblance, at least in my mind, and I have a suspicion that genetically we share a common body type. Even more amazing to me is the sense of pull that I've always felt towards ministry, a pull that predates my awareness of Unitarian Universalism. Could it be connected to the life of someone who lived 100 years before me? What was so significant about the life of Augusta Jane Chapin that seemed to reach through the ages and affect the life of a distant 4th cousin 3 times removed? Maybe you can decide the answers to these questions when you learn a little bit more about her. Augusta Jane was born July 16, 1836, in Lakeville, New York, and she was the oldest of 11 children, 4 girls and 7 boys. Perhaps as firstborn, it's no surprise that she was described as strong-willed and an eager learner. Her father was so proud of her ability to learn that he enrolled her in school when she was only 3 years old. The family moved to Michigan, near Lansing, where Augusta continued her education and pursued her interests by reading books in her father's library. She read and reread Pilgrim's Progress and Robinson Crusoe many times, and also memorized large sections of the New Testament. At 14, Augusta interrupted her own education to teach school in Lansing and Lyons. But by age 16, she wanted a more formal education, and her first choice was the University of Michigan. The University of Michigan denied her admittance because she was a female, so she enrolled at Olivet College, a congregational college in Olivet, Michigan. At Olivet, Augusta was deeply troubled about the concept of eternal punishment. She came finally to the conclusion that Bible, nature, and reason supported the Universalist position that all persons will be saved. And she knew at that time, although only 17, she wanted to be a minister. Years later, she told a biographer, "I have no recollection of ever considering the question of whether I would preach or not. I never deliberately chose the profession of ministry. From the moment I believed in Universalism, it was a matter of course that I was to preach it. I never questioned how I came by this purpose, nor did it ever seem in the least strange that I should preach, nor had I any real conception of how my course must appear to my friends in the world until I'd been more than 10 years in the active work." Augusta continued her studies at Michigan Female College while serving as school principal in Lansing and Lyons. Then she became the head of the Lyons Institute, where she taught Greek, Latin, French, German, higher mathematics, oil painting, and drawing. In 1859, she preached her first sermon at Portland, Michigan, and on December 3rd, 1863, 6 months after the ordination of Olympia Brown, Augusta was ordained to the Universalist ministry in Lansing. From her first sermon to 1901, when she resigned her last settlement, her life was immersed in ministry and issues of social justice. In 1873, Augusta was one of the members of the organizing committee for the Association for the Advancement of Women. Papers were read by leading women of that day, including Julia Ward Howe, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Frances Willard, and Harriet Beecher Stowe. Augustus's paper was entitled Women's Work in the Pulpit and the Church. And this excerpt from her paper reveals some of the issues of that time. Let us consider what, being already in the ministry, women can and ought to do therein. Shall she preach a little by way of experiment only? There are those that are fond of claiming that this is an experiment of doubtful issue. Is it so? My own experience, extending through 15 years of uninterrupted pulpit and parish work, years of work in the rural villages and neighborhoods of the West, years of work as a settled pastor in a large and growing parish, personal acquaintance with hundreds of parishes east and west in a dozen different states of the Union. All this together with years of study in college as direct preparation for work has not led me to feel that it's an experiment. Those who fear that women cannot endure the fatigue of the work may be referred to the fact that among the 100 or more women now, preachers in the field of various denominations, we hear less complaint of fatigue and ill health than among an equal amount of men doing equal work. That paper became the seed for another paper in 1874, printed in the repository. Here she pointed out that it was not necessarily a positive to carry on work exactly as had been done in the past. She felt that the church had failed to achieve its potential, and with blunt declaration she stated, "There is an intellectual apprehension of the saving truth, but it's not practically applied. Corruption in places high and low, in every conceivable direction, together with superficial living and thinking everywhere, convinces us something is wanted. They have forgotten that it is within the heart that man believes to righteousness." Interspersed through all her experiences in ministry was her quest for continuing education, and in 1868, Lombard College in Galesburg, Illinois, granted Augusta an honorary Master of Arts degree, but she wanted more education. And when the University of Michigan finally opened to women, she enrolled and earned a Master of Arts degree in 1884 in rhetoric and contemporary languages. And in 1893, Lombard conferred on her the first Doctor of Divinity degree ever awarded to a woman in America. Her ministry took her many places in the United States. She served congregations from New York to California, and most of her congregations were small and grew when she came while she was with them. She wrote occasional articles for denominational papers and magazines, but did not leave an autobiography to give us insights into her view of ministry. And samples of her work can be found only in scattered papers and unindexed denominational publications of her day. But learning and teaching continued to be interspersed with ministry throughout her life. She was a non-resident lecturer at Lombard and an extension lecturer in English literature for the University of Chicago. She was even part of the revising committee with Elizabeth Cady Stanton for the Woman's Bible, and her accomplishments were many, yet the story is only partially told until we learn of her participation in the World's Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893. This event was held in conjunction with the 1893 World's Fair that was also happening in Chicago. It was to be an event reflecting religious diversity, just as the World's Fair was to reflect secular diversity. As a Universalist minister, Augusta believed in the worth of all religions and that all people would be saved not just those who profess Christianity. And in promotion of the Parliament, Augusta wrote a paper entitled The Coming Synthesis of Religion, the Contribution of Universalism. And this is what she said. The religion of the present has grown out of the past. It has been growing according to time, place, and environment in all ages and all lands. The more minutely and critically we study the religions of the ages and the nations, the more manifest is the truth that religion is one. The same germ buds at the breast of the indigenous people, unfolds in the brain of Moses, Confucius or Buddha, burst into bloom in the prophecy of Isaiah and the life of Jesus. Every phase of religion anywhere, in any time, is the preaching and outreaching after the unseen and the divine realities of which we are all, in a degree, consciousness. That paper was just the beginning of her participation. The organizers decided not to have any mixed committee of men and women, but they created a women's branch so that the women could show their place and part in modern progress. Women's committees were created, corresponding to the committees of men on all subjects appropriate for the cooperation of women. Remember, women did not yet have the right to vote and had little official voice in other matters of political or social importance. To be included in the Congress of World Religions was an effort to maintain separate but equal conditions. Does that sound familiar? Augusta was asked to be the chairman of Women's General Committee on Religious Congresses. She addressed the opening and closing sessions and was the only woman to preside over a session of the Parliament. She sat on the platform for both the opening and closing sessions of the main Congress, and her face appears in a photograph among the presenters of the Congress. And if you look closely at the back row in the photograph, she's a woman. She is the woman wearing a hat and is seated next to the only other woman that's on stage. In the opening session, she greeted the delegates with these words: I am strangely moved as I stand here today and attempt to realize what it means that you're here from so many lands, representing so many phases of religious thought of life, and what it means that I am here in the midst of this unique assembly to speak a word for womanhood and to represent women's part in this great religious parliament. 100 years ago, the world was not ready for this parliament of religion. Had it been called even one generation ago, it must have lacked the cooperation and the presence in its deliberation of one half of the religious world. Women would not have had a part in her own right. She could not have participated for two reasons. One, that her presence would not be thought of or tolerated. Another, that she herself was too weak to attempt, too unskilled to have availed herself of the privilege of speaking for herself had it been extended to her. In 1898, Augusta became the pastor of the Universalist Church in Mount Vernon, New York, and this was to be her last settlement. She resigned from the Mount Vernon congregation in 1901 and made plans to travel abroad. In 1905, while she was planning to lead her 13th summer literary tour to Europe, she became ill and died from pneumonia on June 30th, 2 weeks before her 69th birthday. But even as one life ended, the doors continued to open for new stories for women who were to follow in her footsteps. And today, there are actually more Unitarian Universalist women ministers than men in active ministry. The message of the Universalist gospel is one reason so many women have felt the work of the ministry important. Augusta understood the significance of the message of Universalism when she spoke of her conversion. After long struggles through ways of darkness, with no one to counsel, a child in a school of an opposite faith, I came to a knowledge of this great truth. It seemed to me a foregone conclusion that there was nothing for me to do but to give my powers and my lives to the promulgation of the great, the glorious truth, which is one thing which this world needs to bring us to the dawn of millennium morning. Her later writings also express the importance of the Universalist message. In an article entitled "Success in Church Work," she wrote, "The mission of the Church of Christ is to bless, or to use a word we can better understand, to help the world, not a few people, not a limited circle, not those alone who are already members of it, but the world, just as far as influence could reach. The successful church is one that has a record of peace on earth and goodwill to men as broad as the charity of gospel." My connection with Augusta Jane seems to go deeper than what I've read of her words. I believe there are even more circumstances that brought her life into mine. In 1992, I was offered a position with the International Association of Religious Freedom to work in their main office in Germany. And my task was to organize the logistics for a 100-year commemoration of that 1893 World's Parliament that was to be held in India in 1993. The last month of my time would be spent on location in Bangalore, India, working with members of religious organizations from many countries. The entire year in the international office was filled with responsibilities and learning about the rest of the world and about myself. I knew I would carry many memories with me the rest of my life. Especially would that prove to be true during the last month and the final weeks in India. I'll never forget the images of that last day of chaotic preparation. The tents had finally been erected, and all the guests had been assigned their roles. Everyone had official name tags and programs for the events. The sound system was in place, and we were ready to actually begin the opening session. I stepped back from the pavilion and the music and watched the ceremonies begin. Through the mist and the fragrant air of India, I breathed a sigh of relief that my major responsibilities were over. It was actually happening. And it may have been my vivid imagination or a moment transcending time. But I thought I felt the presence of a hand on my shoulder, and a voice seemed to say, "Good job, well done." And to this day, as I remember that moment, I think it had to be Augusta Jane, my fourth cousin, 3 times removed, sharing that sense of achievement with me.
Today's closing hymn is number 187. It sounds along the ages.
It sounds along the ages, soul answering to soul. It kindles on the pages of every Bible scroll. The psalmist heard and sang it, from mortal lips it broke, and prophet tongues outrang it, till sleeping nations woke. From Sinai's cliffs it echoed, it breathed from Buddha's tree. It charmed the Athens market, it hallowed Galilee. The hammer stroke of Luther, the pilgrim's seaside prayer, the oracles of Concord, one holy word declare. It calls and lo, new justice, it speaks and lo, new truth. In ever nobler stature and unexhausted youth, forever on resounding and knowing not of time, our laws but catch the music of its eternal chime.
Our closing words are number 575. A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
When man and woman may regard one another as brother and sister, able both to appreciate and to prophesy to one another.
A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
What woman needs is not as a woman to act or rule, but as a nature to grow, as an intelligence to discern, as a soul to live freely and unimpeded, to unfold such powers as were given her.
A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
Man does not have his fair share either. His energies are repressed and distorted by the interposition of artificial obstacles.
A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
We would have every arbitrary barrier thrown down. We would have every path laid open to woman as freely as to man.
Were this done, we believe a divine energy would pervade nature to a degree unknown in the history of former ages.
A new manifestation is at hand. A new hour is come.
Margaret Fuller.
May the blessings of love rest upon you. May peace abide with you. May God's presence illuminate your heart now and forevermore.
Go in peace, know that you are loved, and that your life is sacred.